Dr. Mac Chown, a Barrie doctor who provides primary care to the homeless, advocated for increased funding for social services. Speaking to Simcoe Community Media, he opposed the allocation of one quarter of city's budget to the Barrie Police. Instead, he argued for greater investment in services such as housing, addiction care, mental health care, and medical care.
One quarter, as one of the deputants said, of our budget is coming from the police. So I think that's an easy place to start, especially when you consider the harms that the police do cause in our community. So even in that sphere, I still think that stable housing is the most important thing. Like a lot of these services, like important, like addiction care, mental health care, and medical care. These things are all important. If someone is unhoused, that's the number one determinant of their health right there. And so it's very, very challenging to deal with anything else unless you start with that basic foundation, which many of us take for granted.
The Clinic for the Homeless operates Monday to Thursday from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. at Trinity Anglican Church, with Dr. Chown available on Thursdays. Another healthcare professional, trauma therapist Kaitlin Baldwin, also called for increased funding for social services, including mental health and addiction support. Talking to us, she highlighted the incidents of violence involving police, particularly affecting LGBTQ and BIPOC communities.
As a psychotherapist and kind of specifically a trauma therapist now, there isn't a single person I work with who isn't affected by social service issues. The struggle to afford their rent, the struggle to afford groceries, the challenges in accessing services. Every single person that I work with, even those with a lot of privilege, even financially, struggle with this lack of social services that are available to them. So for me, both in my history as a therapist and starting in community mental health, where I provided free therapy to a lot of unhoused people and a lot of people impacted by the drug poisoning crisis, their situation cannot be resolved or remediated by increased policing. And in fact, I think something that Barrie and City Council really wants us to ignore is that the people who are the most vulnerable are the most at risk to police violence. And this happens continuously. This happens when, I work with a lot of queer folks who are terrified of interacting with police because of how many queer people have died or been brutalized at the hands of police.
Despite these concerns, the city approved the budget, even after Ward 4 Councillor Amy Councillor expressed frustration with the lack of opportunity for debate. Barrie Mayor Alex Nuttall emphasized that opportunities to discuss the budget were available and cautioned against making public statements suggesting otherwise.
There have been more opportunities to speak to this budget than any budget that's ever been passed in the city of Barrie. And I say that with confidence. As my 11th budget I've been part of, it is by far provided more opportunity than ever before. So, number one, thank you for being part of that process and for getting us through it. Number two, folks, please watch what we're saying publicly. Because when we say that things have been stifled or haven't had the opportunity, but there's actually more opportunity than there ever has been before, I take that personally.
City's budget includes more than $340 million in total spending, with around $200 million funded by property taxes. Homeowners will see a property tax increase of 4.31%, which amounts to just over $200 for a Barrie home assessed at $369,000. Among the city's major service partners, the Barrie Police have requested more than $72 million for their 2025 budget, the highest request among all three service partners, which also include Simcoe County and the Barrie Public Library. For 2025, Simcoe County has requested $33 million from the city to fund various social services, including Ontario Works, Children's Services, Community Services, Paramedic Services, Long-Term Care, and the Simcoe County Museum and Archives. And the Barrie Public Library has requested around $10 million, an increase of 3.7% or around $100,000 over last year. Among the service partners, the Barrie Police is seeking a 7% increase, the highest percentage increase, while Simcoe County has requested a 2.9% increase. Following are the interviews and our coverage of the meeting.
I'm in agreement with the deputation speaking against the increase in the police budget. I think the money for social services has to come from somewhere, and the biggest piece of the pie right now, 1/4, as one of the deputants said, of our budget is coming from the police. So I think that's an easy place to start, especially when you consider the harms that the police do cause in our community. So I'm in agreement with what their opinion is. Yeah, I think housing's the biggest one, the most obvious example of where we could be spending money as opposed to on the police. Even in that sphere, I still think that stable housing is the most important thing. Like a lot of these services, like important, like addiction care, mental health care, and medical care. These things are all important. If someone is unhoused, that's the number one determinant of their health right there. And so it's very, very challenging to deal with anything else unless you start with that basic foundation, which many of us take for granted. I joined an organization called Compassionate Care Without Barriers this January. This was started about a year ago by Joanne Flood and Brenda Brown, and this is the idea with this organization is to provide accessible health care to a population that has that does not have access to that service currently. So the program or the clinic is located at Trinity Anglican Church, which they've donated clinic space, and they also run a breakfast program. So the idea is that trying to reach people where they are, and so a lot of the population that's using the breakfast program is unhoused, and so the idea is to provide a clinic where they can access care. We're open Monday to Thursday, 8 to 4. Yeah, I'm there on Thursdays, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. or whenever people stop coming, essentially. Yeah, and I should just mention that the clinic previously was running 1 day a week, but with new funding from Simcoe County, we've been able to expand the hours. Yeah, so I work in Aurelia primarily, doing anesthesia there, but my residency was in family medicine in Barrie, so I wanted to do primary care, and I wanted to try to do it for a population that didn't have access to primary care currently, or is least likely to have access to primary care currently, because many people don't have access to primary care. So that was my intention once I found out that what Brenda and Joanne had started, I was very much interested in joining them.
So my main concerns about the police budget are that, one, at its existing level approved in 2024, it's already extremely high for the population of the city of Barrie, which sits in and around 160 to 170,000 people. There's also significant data, and any person can come across hundreds of well-researched articles about the fact that higher police budgets do not equate safer cities and lower levels of crime. There are proven statistics about what actually reduces crime, and these are things in and around the social determinants of health. This is your access to safe and warm shelter, your access to food and water, your access to community and safe connections with other people. And to me, it's quite ridiculous to be in a city like Barrie and most cities in Ontario where there's this huge discrepancy and a huge proportion of the population that does not have their basic needs met, and yet we are putting millions and millions of more dollars into policing. The point that I made, and that I really hope people understand, is police do not prevent crime whatsoever. They are not there before crime happens to make sure that the situation is alleviated or de-escalated. They come afterwards. And so if we're actually looking to increase safety, increase quality of life, increase community, we need to do things that increase and actually prevent crime, which is social services, basic needs, public housing, food, shelter, and everything that is essential, rather than uplifting and giving significantly more funding to an organization that can only respond to crime. as a psychotherapist and kind of specifically a trauma therapist now, there isn't a single person I work with who isn't affected by social service issues. The struggle to afford their rent, the struggle to afford groceries, the challenges in accessing services. Every single person that I work with, even those with a lot of privilege, even financially, struggle with this lack of social services that are available to them. So for me, both in my history as a therapist and starting in community mental health, where I provided free therapy to a lot of unhoused people and a lot of people impacted by the drug poisoning crisis, their situation cannot be resolved or remediated by increased policing. And in fact, I think something that Barrie and City Council really wants us to ignore is that the people who are the most vulnerable are the most at risk to police violence. And this happens continuously. This happens when, I work with a lot of queer folks who are terrified of interacting with police because of how many queer people have died or been brutalized at the hands of police. There are Indigenous people that I work with who are terrified of connecting with police because so many Indigenous people have been killed at the hands of police, even for things like a mental health wellness check. So for me as a therapist, we're often kind of taught this like default statement of, if someone's in a mental health crisis, call 911. And I don't have any faith or trust in that. I don't feel like it's an ethical referral to call police when I know that so many people have died at the hands of police during those wellness calls. So it's not only showing up in my work now in terms of kind of the daily issues that really continue to intensify people's suffering in terms of, struggle of quality of life and cost of living, but then it also really comes through in these high crisis moments, which is a lot of what I work with, where people don't feel safe whatsoever to connect with police, and rightfully so. This isn't a false belief that, police are bad or wrong that doesn't have any merit or evidence to it. This is founded in evidence. Police are systemically more oppressive, harmful, and punitive to people of the global majority, including Black, Brown, Indigenous, Latin, and Asian folks. They are more risky and more likely to be violent towards queer folks, and more likely to be violent towards neurodivergent folks and autistic people. And so that's the majority of the people that I work with. They cannot feel safe connecting with police. And so it just brings forward this big question of, why are we dumping more and more funding into them when they could truly benefit from so many other services that already exist here, but that are getting scraps? So the piece that was most frustrating, and I do appreciate the one councillor like really trying to ask and clarify, what is this plan to deal with the encampments? Where is the funding going?
If there are people that are camping in our parks and there's not accessible spaces for them in shelter, will they still be removed from parks?
So the spaces that need to be provided or are being provided as part of the plan, it is not the plan to go in and remove ahead of having the capacity. I can't speak for the county. We don't run the county. What they do is up to them. But the plan that they put forward certainly tries to create spaces. They're looking for places for these spaces right now. As you know, we have a bit of a land issue in Barrie, and we're trying to figure out what that looks like and where it is. And when you pair that with the funding that we just received for the Heart Hub, which will also create more space, I think that the outlook is good, but the first step is to create the space before you're doing any of the other stuff.
So to be clear, then there will not be residents, unhoused people that are camping in parks removed unless there's accessible spaces for them. So we don't know the answer to this?
Mr. Prowse.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Courser, perhaps I can assist. The county is not responsible, Councillor Courser, for removing encampments from parks. The city does that, but we do it in partnership with the county. And I can tell you that our protocol requires that they have been offered appropriate housing prior to us ever moving on an encampment. So that is a commitment from the city. That is part of our protocol. but it is the city that initiates it in partnership with the county, not the county removing encampments. It's the city that removes encampments.
And so when somebody is moved from an encampment, then as the city, we will ensure that whoever is moved from an encampment has an accessible place for them that will be address their specific individual issues.
As a follow-up through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Courser, it gets more complicated, Councillor Courser. Well, we do remove the encampments. We do not provide, as you know, the social housing. So we rely on the service manager, that be the County of Simcoe, for a number of things, two of which are to confirm that the individuals in the encampments have indeed been offered appropriate housing, and secondly, through the service providers, to eventually provide that housing if the individual chooses to take them up on it. The city does not provide that function, nor do we control if they actually go into housing. So there's split responsibilities, but it's also a partnership. So I can't tell you definitively that we ensure that they go into housing, because that's just not our purview. But that is the expectation from the county, and so far the county has been a very good partner in that regard.
I had a few major concerns. One is that there was no clarity or transparency about the proportion of this budget. They had said that it was to address two things. One, to support individuals who are unhoused and to give them necessary supports, i.e. housing. And then, the other part of this budget, and I can't remember how much was proposed, but the other part of this budget is to actually clear out the encampments. My major issue is that there's no transparency on how much that is. So there may be 90% of that proposed budget going to clearing out parks and encampments and 10%. I have no idea if that's the right proportion, but there was no transparency offered about that. My second issue is that there was so much ambiguity, and Councillor names that as well. There was a lot of gray area because they had said, well, here's the city's plan, and we're asking City Council here to approve this funding. But then they said, well, the plan isn't ours, it's County of Simcoe. And then a different councillor had said, well, the city of Barrie is responsible for the evictions, but it's the County of Simcoe that's offering the housing. So by splitting the responsibility into City of Barrie and Barrie bylaw and County of Simcoe, they're creating a lot of grayness in who is responsible and in that guarantee that people will actually be given adequate housing. And what I can say in the evictions that I've been protesting at, that I have been keeping up to date on with my comrades, is that they are not offering sufficient housing. Something that people do not understand is if a County of Simcoe worker comes forward and says, hey, we can take you out of this encampment and put you up in a motel, that sounds lovely, I'm sure. But what happens if they're only in that motel for 2 days? And now they have lost all of their belongings. They've lost their bike if they have it. They've lost their tent if they have it because they don't have space to store it. And so after those 2 days are gone, what happens to them? They are forced to return to that encampment, and now they're in an even worse position because they've likely lost those belongings, or they go pick up and go elsewhere. The problem with emergency shelter options, and especially the way that the City of Barrie has gone about it, has been very sneaky. It has been, I can commonly say that there have been lies about what services are available. Even if we look at the idea of warming centers, they have put out repeated statements about the warming centers available, but they weren't warming centers. They were emergency shelter provided by Elizabeth Fry, which was 8 motel rooms, which was already taken up. It was beds at Salvation Army, but again, these are shelter beds. They are not a warming center that you can drop into. And they were beds at the Busby Center, but the Busby Center was at capacity every night. And also the Busby Center is not accessible for folks in wheelchairs or with mobility impairments because it has stairs. So when people talk about people needing to be offered accessible housing and housing that actually meets their needs, it's not someone frivolously asking for everything under the sun and not getting that. It's saying, I'm in a wheelchair, or it's saying, I have PTSD and someone screaming at me in this, 20-bed shelter room is not going to work for me. That's where accessibility comes in. That's where services that actually meet someone's needs comes in. And the City of Barrie has completely missed their job and their responsibility to adequately give that. And they've done so by using County of Simcoe as a scapegoat so that they're removed from responsibility, which just allows the whole situation to kind of slip through the cracks. Like in my ideal, if this funding wasn't, I mean, I'm biased as a mental health worker, right? I know that I can only serve 5% of the population that can afford therapy or that has benefits coverage. So I'm really biased to the perspective of giving significant money to mental health organizations, including CMHA, including Catholic Family Services. However, I think more important than that is addressing those basic needs, which is organizations like Empower Simcoe. It's like the Elizabeth Fry Society. It's organizations that offer emergency shelter, temporary housing, transitional housing, housing first programs, like Redwood has created in multiple areas in the city. The reality is that you can't therapy or counsel someone through homelessness. You just can't. And I've tried it, and I've done that with many people before, and it can offer support, but you have to address someone's basic needs first. And what it feels like is happening now is we're skipping past all these beautiful organizations in Barrie that address people's basic needs, and then we're going to this almost removed, unnecessary piece that wouldn't have to exist at such an extreme, being the Barrie Police, if basic needs were addressed. So I really do think that housing first initiatives, especially looking at the stats of how little they cost. One figure that I had quoted in my deputation today was about the cost of social housing, and that one day of this now approved Barrie Police budget would equate one day of social housing for 29,000 people. Social housing and housing first programs are extremely cheap compared to looking at shelter beds or hospital beds or time in jail. And they continue to be ignored despite the huge amount of evidence supporting their importance. So I really think housing first in a mega scale way that would be a significant upfront investment, absolutely, but then would eliminate so many emergency services over time would be the step that I would want to see money invested into.
Back into the agenda, we're going to move into number 8, which is deputations on committee reports concerning the 2025 business plan and budget for service partners. For the deputation requests received after the printing of the agenda, a vote in favor by a majority of council is required in order for the emergency deputation to proceed. So I'll ask for all those in favor of allowing the emergency deputations to proceed, please put up your hand. And it is approved unanimously. So we're going to go through it in the order that they came in. So Mr. Spears, we're going to start with you with your deputation. So please do come up to the microphone. I'll just note that you know this already, but not everyone does. There's 5 minutes per speaking. There'll be a timer that you'll be able to see as well, Mr. Spears. And when you start speaking, the timer will begin.
I'm here this evening to once again ask you to vote against this year's Barrie Police Service budget. I want to spend my allotted time to explain why policing is nothing more than a discriminatory and violent method of control, and why further investments in policing are detrimental to our community. It's taken for granted that council would consider public safety to be a priority. However, I think decisions made by all of you here over the years, as well as those made by previous councils, demonstrates a clear contradiction that is harming people and making our community less safe. Evidence shows that higher police budgets do not necessarily lead to safer communities. Instead, they often perpetuate systemic inequalities, divert resources from more effective solutions, and fail to address the root causes of crime. Now, I'm not naive. I've been here before. There's little chance that you won't approve the police budget this evening, but I'm not one to give up on an issue that I believe strongly in. So let me outline 3 key reasons why increasing the police budget is the wrong approach. First, over-policing harms communities. Higher police budgets lead to increased policing in marginalized neighborhoods. In the case of Barrie, this means low-income areas and other places where vulnerable populations generally congregate. Research consistently shows that over-policing results in a disproportionate surveillance, harassment, and violence against many members of our community. This creates a climate of fear and mistrust eroding any relationship between law enforcement and the people they claim to serve. Instead of fostering safety, policing deepens systemic inequalities and perpetuates cycles of harm. Rather than being treated with compassion or connected to services, people experiencing homelessness or struggling with some type of substance use or addiction are frequently met with hostility and aggression by police. Relying on them to manage these issues prioritizes punishment over care and reflects a systemic failure to provide things like adequate housing and social supports. Second, police are not equipped to address the root causes of crime. Crime is a symptom of deeper societal issues such as poverty, lack of affordable housing, mental health challenges, and inadequate access to services and employment opportunities. Police are not trained or equipped to address these root causes. Yet, year after year, we see the police budget in Barrie grow while social services, mental health programs, transit, the library, and other community initiatives remain badly underfunded. For example, studies show that investing in truly affordable public housing reduces homelessness and related crimes. Yet, so many people in Barrie cannot find adequate housing. Many more live rough on our streets. By prioritizing police budgets over proven solutions, we are choosing a reactive approach over a proactive one. We are choosing violent encampment evictions over creating accessible shelter spaces for everyone who needs them. Third, higher police budgets divert resources from what works. Every dollar allocated to the police budget is a dollar taken away from programs that could have a far greater impact on community well-being. If we were to redirect the millions of dollars that now go to Barrie Police towards providing things like housing, more shelter spaces, food programs, mental health supports, better transit, a supervised consumption site, or other solutions for the toxic drug crisis, etc., there would be less need for the police in the first place. As a Marxist, I use facts to find the truth. Material conditions and material realities guide my outlook. The material reality before us tonight is the fact that the police do not prevent crime, and giving them more money will not make our community safer. But we know for a fact that investing in people and what they need will. Therefore, I ask this of you. Instead of approving this budget, demand a minimum 10% cut and an immediate hiring freeze by the police. Commit to transferring city funding away from the police and into programs that help the unhoused and are most vulnerable. This should be followed by a period of civilianization of some police functions after comprehensive engagement and consultation with community groups, then the offloading of more core police responsibilities to the municipality or other civilian agencies. Instead of pouring more money into policing, we need to reimagine public safety. This means reallocating resources to address the root causes of crime, investing in community building initiatives, and ensuring that everyone has access to the supports they need. It means creating a new system where police are not the default response to every social issue. Higher police budgets are not the answer to creating a safer community. Policing is a plague that perpetuates harm.
Thank you, Mr. Spears. I appreciate your presentation this evening. I'm sorry, we're going to have to keep on moving. Are there any questions for Mr. Spears? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions at this point, so I'm going to move on to the next, which is Ms. Kaitlin Baldwin. The microphone, once you start speaking, is yours, and that's when they'll start the 5 minutes for you as well. Okay. Welcome to council.
Oh, sorry, when I start speaking.
Sorry, I'm gonna, there's two in the audience. I just need to highlight this. In the council chambers, we don't have hats. Hats are not to be worn in the council chambers.
So I have a concussion. I'm really triggered by bright lights, which is why I have
Okay,
it.
understood. I'll completely accept that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. On January 3rd of this year, a Black woman was tackled and pinned to the ground by 3 policemen for trying to steal $7 worth of sushi. On October 25th of 2024, a Muslim woman and an Indigenous woman were both dragged to the ground and forcefully detained by 3 officers while at a police brutality protest. On September 8th of 2024, a Mi'kmaq man and father named Iggy Dadam was tased, shot 3 times, and killed by police who were responding to a mental health wellness check.
And on August 30th, 2024, a 15-year-old boy, Haas Lightning, was shot and killed by police after calling 911 for help. These are not news headlines from the US. And with respect to your land acknowledgement at the start of today, this man and child were 2 of 6 Indigenous people killed by police in Canada over the span of 11 days last year. I could speak endlessly about my concerns about the Barrie Police. The fact that our citizens have been held at gunpoint when they were suicidal, the number of officers placed on paid leave when faced with domestic violence charges or DUIs, the fact that officers who sit at construction zones get paid overtime for additional taxpayer money outside of this proposed $72 million budget. That fuels my emotion here for sure, but this is a much bigger discussion. The police force in Barrie is being used as a catch-all to address dozens of different issues in Barrie, including housing, mental health, relational issues, poverty, and that is not their job. $72.24 million breaks down to $197,917 per day. And if following 2024, 98% of that budget goes to salaries and benefits. Do you agree, City Council, that on every day of the year, $200,000 worth of crime happens? For context, that daily cost also equates to 1 day in free social housing for 29,699 people, a shelter bed for 3,073 people, a free therapy session for 1,979 people, an overnight stay in the hospital for 544 people, and a day's worth of groceries for 19,791 people. Let me reiterate, this budget suggests that 1 day of work from the Barrie Police Force is worth the same amount of money as a shelter housing 3,000 people. I know that our opposition alone may feel like a threat to something that you all care about. Maybe it's tradition or safety or something else that you want to protect. So I want to ask each of you to take a moment and reflect on what values are at play for you here. What is the thing that you're trying to protect or hold on to with this budget increase? And what are you afraid of losing? If you were to ask me about my values as a therapist, I'd show you through my work that I care deeply about safety, autonomy of all people, health, belonging, and ultimately survival. And I imagine I'm on the same page as many of you here about those things. But I want to make it clear that those fears you may have of what we'd lose without this budget, safety, community, peace, quality of life, we have already lost it. This is evidenced by the fact that I've worked with a man who lost his business, wife, and home after a major car accident, and now unhoused, he is trapped in a cycle of fentanyl use to manage the cold weather as a homeless person. I've worked with a woman who was trapped in an abusive relationship for years because she couldn't afford housing and childcare on her own. I've worked with someone who is chronically suicidal because they work as hard as they can and still live paycheck to paycheck. I work with people like this every day. And even being disabled from a concussion for this past year, I am one of these people. City Council, I ask you, would there be as many police calls to the Busby Center or Salvation Army if shelters were resourced with enough well-trained staff, enough space, beds, toiletries, and food? Would there be as many calls to police for domestic violence if victims were no longer trapped in abusive relationships because they could easily access housing and childcare? Would police be called for wellness checks as often if people had alternative and effective mental health supports that were easy to access? Police should not and cannot effectively be responsible for 1/4 of what a city needs. Thus, they should not receive 1/4 of our city budget. Let's remind ourselves of what we're trying to protect here. Safety, quality of life, community. With less than 1/4 of the existing police budget, we could reinvest into social housing programs, emergency shelters, libraries, social service organizations, food banks, and supporting the many not-for-profits that provide free and necessary mental health care. Crime is a social issue. Police do not and cannot prevent crime. They can only at best respond to it.
Thank you for your presentation and for the timeliness of it as well. Any questions around the table? Seeing none, so thank you so much for your presentation this evening. And we'll move on to the next deputation. So I'm going to ask Daisy Oliveros to come and approach the podium. Have I said your name correctly?
Oh, yeah.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
Okay. That will be like a first, so we should put that down that I got a name right.
I'm kind of used to it being mispronounced, so it doesn't really bother me.
Okay, well, welcome to council, and you have 5 minutes as well, ma'am.
Okay, thanks. Good evening, Mayor Nuttall and council. Thank you for allowing this deputation. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I actually agree with much of what Michael Spears and what Kaitlin had to say. I think there are vulnerable people in our city, and I think they would benefit greatly from social programs and empowering activities. And I'm personally very interested in seeing at-risk individuals of any age receive a second chance at rejoining society. I have worked alongside someone who turned her life around with some help from the David Busby Street Centre, and she now lives indoors independently. So this woman is safer than she was when she was homeless, but she still has problems. Her next door neighbor, a man who thinks he has a relationship with her but does not, showed up at our workplace on more than one occasion, and he was not invited there. He had no business being there, and this behavior crossed the line. So I encouraged her to call the police to report him for stalking, and she wouldn't do it. She seemed unsure of whether or not this would be taken seriously or whether or not police would have time for a complaint of this nature. I think police are essential when it comes to protecting vulnerable people. I think that Barrie Police should be well funded and that funding should result in a police force that is able to respond to the needs of a growing city. We're only getting bigger. You will need more police. Furthermore, if at-risk youth are to have access to any programs that guide them in the right direction, maybe they could also have access to positive interactions with police officers. Maybe just once in a while. This would reinforce the position that Michael Spears has, and it would help young people to see that police are not the boogeymen that they've been made out to be. And if anyone needs reminding, police are human. And when they are stressed, tired, overworked, or spread too thin, they may fail to live up to the standards of excellency that we often expect of them. I would also like everyone who is listening to consider that in every city, there are those who are inclined to exploit others. This is a very unfortunate reality. They will exploit those who have difficulty enforcing their personal boundaries, and if they perceive law enforcement to be too busy, too overloaded, overwhelmed, it only serves to embolden those who would take advantage. I think cities such as Seattle, San Francisco, or Vancouver are kind of examples of this. If you wanted to look for yourself, there's plenty of footage on YouTube. So if anyone here on City Council cares about the safety of Barrie's residents, particularly women and girls, if you care about discouraging those who would take advantage of others, then you should care about Barrie's police force, and you should make sure that they have what they need. Thanks.
Thank you for your presentation this evening. Are there any questions for Daisy this evening? I'm seeing none. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
I'm going to call down Ash Pinault, please. Ash, welcome to City Council.
So I'm just going to start this right off the back by saying the library does more for the community than the Barrie Police ever has. In fact, the Barrie Police are harming the community. They are the problem. So giving them more money to terrorize our community is going to help how? It's not. You know it's not. I know it's not. A lot of the people here know it's not going to help anything. So let's talk about what this is really about. Bullying, control, greed, and manipulation. Some of you sitting in front of me have yet to grow up from high school. You sit there thinking you're better than everyone else and actively harm people. This isn't about making Barrie safe. This is about control, manipulation, and criminalization of our most vulnerable community members. Alex, you should be ashamed of yourself for more reasons than I have time to list. I don't know how you sleep at night. Each of you that do nothing but let Alex tell you how to live your life, honestly, that's punishment enough. I don't need to say anything on that. I'm not here to try and change your minds. You've proven you don't care. I'm here to call you out and make you sit with the ripple effects of your actions. Here to say that if you would listen to the real community of Barrie, there would be no need to ever discuss an increase in the police budget. you would invest into the solutions that are literally everywhere. It would make everyone's lives better. Literally everyone. But you're not in this to make lives better now, are you? The secret is out, and you won't be able to hide behind this stigma for much longer. The people want better, and we're demanding it.
In one of the deputations, Mr. Spears, you made a comment about encampments as well, and that's what this funding is about. So just want to highlight that for you because you came here and you had took the time for that. And I also want to just remind members of council that what this funding is doing is it's going to be used to both provide for spaces and the supportive services that are required in order to help individuals who are currently living rough or homeless or in an encampment. And so it provides that side, but it also provides the dollars to remove the encampments. And so I want everyone to be very clear on what they're voting on this evening, that this is part of a full plan. The plan isn't just to create spaces and not have any movement inside of parks. The plan is both to provide for those spaces and provide the help that we know is being requested and asked for, as well as moving inside of any of the spaces that we see that are public that are being used for encampments or those types of things. So I want everyone to be very clear on what they're voting for or against on this. I'm sorry, I was feeling under the weather last week, but I think that the county is leading in a very good way on this. We obviously don't always agree with the county, but they need to be also recognized when they're putting all of the right things in place to be able to meet the day on what is, I know is the issue of the ages for us. So I will now, Councillor Morales, yep.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall, and I don't like speaking after you as per the norm. The splitting of the earlier ones, and no disrespect to Deputy Mayor Thompson, that's on me following it. I had an amendment to table just on the Barrie Sports Hall of Fame.
That's at a later point. This is regards to not the county budget, but the support of the funding for the homelessness and encampment funding.
I'd rather be earlier than
late.
Yeah,
100%.
thank you.
So I've got you first on the list after. Councillor Corser.
Question before the vote. So let me be clear that just to clarify, this is, if this is passed, then there will be a movement to empty parks of encampments?
Yes, I'm going to go to Mr. James Reed quickly because I think there's about 700,000 that's set aside for, or maybe, sorry, it might be the clerk. Between the two of you, Madam Clerk, I apologize for going past you there. I think there's about 700,000 that's been set aside for encampment cleanup and removal.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to members of council, there has been, the county received over $3 million for the encampment initiative, and what that money is going to be used for is providing shelters, some shelter space for a removal of, like, to assist with housing people that are currently in encampments, as well as the remediation cost for some of the parks cleanups that will be required as a result of cleaning up as a result of the removal of the encampments.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Follow-up question to that. So my understanding that these shelter spaces that are going to be opening up are follow the rules of that was put forward by the Superior Court of Ontario versus Waterloo, People Anonymous versus Waterloo. I can't remember the name of but I'm sure everybody knows what court case I'm talking about.
Madam Clerk, before you speak, I think that there's been probably four main cases. One of them was Waterloo. There was another more recent, which I think is now going under a request to the Court of Appeal in Hamilton, which I think is probably more closely aligned with the funding that was announced by the province, as well as the response by the county to be supported by the city. The reality is that the county is going to do everything they can to provide quote-unquote accessible space to individuals who need it, and that means different things in different scenarios. But at the end of the day, what the Hamilton court ruling came down with was that the parks, there's more than just those who are living rough that are vulnerable in parks, and that the spaces need to be safe for all vulnerable people, and therefore encampments and open drug use were not welcome in those places. So I know that there's going to be an appeal of that, and then another court decision coming down. I still believe this ends up in the Supreme Court somewhere at some point, but I think this is more closely aligned with that, and I think that's outlined in the motion from last week.
May I, Mayor Nuttall, if there are people that are camping in our parks and there's not accessible spaces for them in shelter, will they still be removed from parks?
So the spaces that need to be provided or are being provided as part of the plan, it is not the plan to go in and remove ahead of having the capacity. I can't speak for the county. We don't run the county. What they do is up to them. But the plan that they put forward certainly tries to create spaces. They're looking for places for these spaces right now. As you know, we have a bit of a land issue in Barrie, and we're trying to figure out what that looks like and where it is. And when you pair that with the funding that we just received for the Heart Hub, which will also create more space, I think that the outlook is good, but the first step is to create the space before you're doing any of the other stuff.
So to be clear, then there will not be residents, unhoused people that are camping in parks removed unless there's accessible spaces for them. So you don't know, or we don't know the answer to this?
Mr. Prowse.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Courser, perhaps I can assist. The county is not responsible, Councillor Courser, for removing encampments from parks. The city does that, but we do it in partnership with the county. And I can tell you that our protocol requires that they have been offered appropriate housing prior to us ever moving on an encampment. So that is a commitment from the city. That is part of our protocol, but it is the city that initiates it in partnership with the county, not the county removing encampments. It's the city that removes encampments.
And so when somebody is moved from an encampment, then as the city, we will ensure that whoever is moved from an encampment has an accessible place for them that will be address their specific individual issues.
As a follow-up through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Courser, it gets more complicated, Councillor Courser. Well, we do remove the encampments. We do not provide, as you know, the social housing. So we rely on the service manager, that be the County of Simcoe, for a number of things, two of which are to confirm that the individuals in the encampments have indeed been offered appropriate housing, and secondly, through the service providers, to eventually provide that housing if the individual chooses to take them up on it. The city does not provide that function, nor do we control if they actually go into housing. So there's split responsibilities, but it's also a partnership. So I can't tell you definitively that we ensure that they go into housing, because that's just not our purview. But that is the expectation from the county, and so far the county has been a very good partner in that regard.
All right, thank you. There's just so much gray to this that information that I guess I should have followed up on earlier, but I think I've made my decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Courser. Any other members of council? Councillor Harris.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Nuttall. I think for me, the important part of understanding the gray is the proposal of the county is looking to add 226 temporary shelter spaces. So I think that's really important. So with cold coming to council tonight, and it would be nice to have 226 more spaces for those people in the cold. So I will support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Any other members of council who'd like to speak to this? I'm seeing none, so I'm going to call a vote and ask for a recorded vote.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Starting with Councillor Rietma,
Yes.
Councillor Nixon,
Yes.
Councillor Kungle,
Yes.
Councillor Corser,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Thompson,
Yes, Madam Clerk.
Councillor Negussi,
Yes.
Councillor Harvey,
Yes.
Councillor Harris,
Yes.
Councillor Morales,
Yes.
Councillor Hamilton,
Yes.
and Mayor Nuttall.
Yes.
Carries
That
un-
is.
carries.
Thank you so much, Madam Clerk. That's unanimous. And Deputy Mayor, over to you.
Be amended, or concerning the 2025 business plan and budget service partners be amended as followed. The amendment to paragraph 2 and add the following. The financial stabilization reserve, as discussed during the Barrie Public Library presentation dated January 15, 2025, be approved. That the future capital expenditure reserve remain intact for its intended purposes and not be renamed or used for general reserves as discussed during the Barrie Public Library presentation on January 15, 2025. And the Barrie Public Library Board be requested to transfer up to 8.3% equal to 1 month of operation expenses of funding and future capital expansion reserve to the fiscal response stabilization reserve, and that an additional 1%, 98,000, reflective of a current Barrie Public Library budget request identified on page 301 of the business plan and budget be allocated to the Barrie Public Library Future Capital Expenditure Reserve, and the tax levy be increased by 98,000, and the capital project entitled Barrie Northwest Boutique Library be established with intended funding for 150 from development charge reserve to allow for staff and corporate facilities in consultation with the Barrie Public Library staff to undertake the initial design and required preliminary work which indicate investigation potential locations and report back to General Committee once completed. The following paragraph be added, paragraph 3, with the renumbering paragraphs the remaining paragraphs to be renumbered accordingly. That staff and financial department develop a list of reporting requirements to be followed by the Barrie Public Library Board when presenting their annual budget request to City Council and report back to Finance and Responsible Governance with the list.
I'm surprised you didn't memorize that one. It's moved by Deputy Mayor Thompson, seconded by Councillor Negussi, that motion 25G015 of Section H of the General Committee Report dated January 22nd, 2025, concerning the 2025 business plan and budget service partners be amended as follows. To amend paragraph 2 to add the following. A, the financial stable... You can definitely request a point of order and ask to speak to the clerk.
Point of order, I'd like to speak to the clerk, please.
All right. It was moved by Deputy Mayor Thompson, seconded by Councillor Negussi, that motion 25G015 of Section H of the General Committee Report dated January 22nd, 2025, concerning the 2025 business plan and budget service partners be amended as follows. To amend paragraph 2 to add the following. A, that the financial stabilization reserve, as discussed during the Barrie Public Library's presentation dated January 15th, be approved. B, that the future capital expenditure reserve remain intact for its intended purpose and not be renamed or used as a general reserve, as discussed during the Barrie Public Library presentation on January 15th. That the Barrie Public Library be requested to transfer up to 8.3% equal to 1 month of operating expenses of funding in future capital expenditure reserve to the financial stabilization reserve. D, that an additional 1%, $98,000, reflective of the current Barrie Public Library budget request identified on page 301 of the business plan and budget be allocated to the Barrie Public Library Future Capital Expenditure Reserve, and the tax levy be increased by $98,000. And E, that a capital project entitled Barrie Northwest Boutique Library be established with initial funding of $150,000 from the Development Charge Reserve to allow for staff and corporate services in consultation with Barrie Public Library staff to undertake the initial design and required preliminary work, which includes investigating potential locations, report back to General Committee once completed. That the following be added as paragraph 3, with the remaining paragraphs to be renumbered accordingly. 3, that the staff in Finance Department develop a list of reporting requirements to be followed by the Barrie Public Library when presenting their annual budget request to City Council and report back to Finance and Responsible Governance with the list. Deputy Mayor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. So after the library presentation, there was a little bit of conversation and stuff of a direction we wanted to kind of see, which I think we're achieving by this motion. And that the library and the board have been working with staff in the reserves with, you know, the intended use and how they're stored, I guess. So that's why the amendment's here. And then with the Northwest Library, you know, a lot of work with staff over the week. We're just looking at some things, and now they have some seed money to start some of the investigations and planning and you know, the feasibility of it and where it would go. So I think, like, as we heard in some of the deputations about, you know, the importance of library. And I think there's been times where people think that, you know, some of the conversation around the table has been anti-library, and it's never been that. We've actually been very supportive of the library. And I think we understand the importance of the library in the community, as they have become hubs, you know, for lots of different reasons and people. So I think this investment and looking to expand their services is achieved by this amendment.
Thank you. Are there any comments? I see Councillor Negussi. Any other members of council? I see Councillor Riepma. Okay, we'll start with Councillor Negussi and then Councillor Riepma.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. I have had quite an intensive dialogue with Deputy Mayor Thompson about this motion. And as a Barrie Public Library Board member, I'm very excited to see the City of Barrie and Barrie Public Library working together on this. And I'm eager to see what we can accomplish collaboratively moving forward. And thank you, Deputy Mayor Thompson. I'm happy with this motion and fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Negussi. Now, Councillor Riepma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just have a question, really, and that is, I just got this resolution as just now, and I guess I'm not sure that I've got my head around all the details of it, but I wonder if the mover could answer this question. Has there been discussion with the library board, and are they happy with what the recommendation is?
Sorry, there's multiple parts to this. Which part are you referring to? If it's regarding the library location, the funds set aside, the moving forward with the Northwest Library, that can go there. If it's with regards to the reserves, I would like to answer that.
Okay.
So which one would you like to?
I don't have a problem with the Northwest. I think that's a perfect, great.
So it's a reserve question.
It's a reserve question.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we had and Chris is here this evening. We had a conversation. I think it was Monday morning as well, and I know others had conversations with library board as well, or members of the library board, chair specifically, and staff. And the request, there was really two requests. One was to create this new reserve, which is in this motion to create that new reserve. The request as part of that reserve was to put a target of 1 month operating dollars into said operating reserve in case, you know, the world ended, right? And so that's in this motion as well. The second request that they had made was to create a second reserve and really move from the future capital expenditure reserve. I think by the end of the conversation, it was more renaming than it was a anything else. But inside of what we are approving, I think there'll be some more report back to Finance Committee based on what this is saying, is that if the the operating reserve falls short, like, if they end up spending $300,000 on, I don't know, something that no one foresaw happening, which is plausible, they can move money from their future capital reserve over to their operating reserve to bring it back up to that amount of having that month available. And so I think at this point, they're okay with it, but I think there's what needs to be, and I'm getting nods, what needs to be finalized is the verbiage around the policies for each of the reserves. And what I didn't want to see, and I don't think it was intended, I think it was just sort of, the thinking on one side was make it as flexible as possible. The thinking on the other side was okay with the flexibility, but we also still want to have our thought process to the future capital, not just, hey, this is all money that can be spent. And I think once we got on, we realized we were pretty much on the same page, and it's just down to policy words. So that'll come back as part of any of our updates in the future. And I think everybody's satisfied that it's not going to constrict the library from being able to operate. It's not going to constrict them from being able to move money between accounts if they need to. So I think, Chris, if you can, am I generally outlining what our conversation was? Yeah. So that was the overall.
Okay. That was my main concern, that just to make sure that the library was on board with all of this and could work with it. Thanks.
And I just got more confirmation from Councillor Negussi, who spoke with the CEO this morning, that she's okay with this move forward or process forward. Okay, any other questions or comments from members of council with regards to the amendment to the budget? I'm seeing none. All those in favor? And it carries. Are there any other amendments? I know I've got Councillor Morales. Is there any other amendments coming forward for the budget this evening? I'm seeing none, so we're going to go over to you. We would have gone to you anyways, Councillor Morales, but it's yours. The floor is yours.
No worries. I just thought you were pointing slightly off to the side, so no, that's okay. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Gary Harvey, that motion 25-G-015 of Section H of the General Committee report dated January 22nd, 2025 concerning the 2025 business plan and budget service partners be amended by the following, to add the following paragraph, that $20,000 be provided to the Barrie Sports Hall of Fame for ongoing operation costs to be funded from the tourism reserve. And I can speak to that, and as I hand it to the Deputy Clerk, members of council will find this in their inboxes. It's a long document.
Thank you, Councillor Morales. It's moved by Councillor Morales and seconded by Councillor Harvey. The motion 25G015, Section H of the General Committee report dated January 22nd, 2025, concerning the 2025 business plan and budget service partners be amended by the following, to add the following paragraph, that $20,000 be provided to the Barrie Sports Hall of Fame for ongoing operating costs to be funded from the Tourism Reserve. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Members of council, I think you will, when you read the motion, you'll see that it's consistent with a lot of the discussions from the Barrie Sports Hall of Fame has communicated to us. They've come here formally, I believe, twice. What I really like about them is the first presentation, they said, this is our vision, what we hope to see. And then the second presentation was, this is what we've done. And it was materially progressed and moved forward. I said it at that reference committee meeting, so I'll say it again. There's lots of people involved, but the two gentlemen, they're spearheading some of this more macro stuff. They are what I can only assume is when people refer to that kind of old school respect and handshake and sincerity, like they embody that. They don't play games. When they say they do something, they say it. When they say they'll arrive there at a time, I'm probably almost always late compared to them, but they are salt of the earth and great gentlemen, and that's how they run this organization. And I think that's why they've had so much success with this. In addition to that, I'm extremely impressed at their, and I'm not going to ever guess their age, but I'm extremely impressed at their embracing of technology. One would assume that somebody of an older generation, and they do really good product with the art framing and the art that they provide. You have a good product, you stick to it and say, The other stuff is trendy. They went, how can we pivot to a mobile on the spot? How can we pivot to kiosks? How can we pivot towards interactive while also keeping the traditional? So nothing but good things to say. And this is something that definitely enhances all of our public spaces at Allendale, at Holly, in East Bayfield, and hopefully more places to come in the future. So I am supportive of this.
Any other questions or comments from members of council? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Through you to the mover of the motion. Maybe just take the chance. I think Councillor Morales joined the board halfway through the first year, I believe. And I think you've actually embraced the whole Hall of Fame and moving them forward. And I got a really nice call from one of the members about your dedication. And I know you traveled to Oshawa to look at a Hall of Fame. So, kudos to you and looking to move this forward.
Any other members of council? Seeing none, I have a confession for the council table. This is something I said publicly that I would put into the budget, did not. Then got reminded by Councillor Morales, still did not. And then got reminded for probably the 7th time that I made a commitment and didn't. And so thank you for following up on that and following through on that, because I forgot. So I apologize.
And Mayor Nuttall, what I love is not just that confession, and I'm not going to point to them, the senior staff members who were smiling while you were saying that and thinking to themselves, oh, so it's not just, he doesn't just do it with me. He also does it with the mayor. So thank you for that as well.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thank you. And I'll call the vote on the amendment that's on the floor from Councillor Morales and Councillor Harvey. I think you seconded it. All those in favor? And it passes. Are there any other amendments to the budget? Comments for the budget? Councillor Hamilton? Morales? Harris? Harvey, you got anything last? Councillor Degussy? I know you don't. I've talked to you too many times about it. Councillor Riepma? Nixon? You're good? Councillor Courser? Okay. So folks, I do have something to say, as you might imagine. I'm sorry I wasn't here last week, but this is the final piece of our budget. And I want to put in perspective some of the changes that we've made to the budget process over the past 2 years, this being, I guess, the more, the healthier of the two, because it was really a bridge year last year. We had a finance committee meeting where members of council, everyone participated. I think everyone was here at the finance committee meeting. We then had a general committee meeting. We then had a city council meeting, and that was all before Christmas. And now we've had 3 meetings in January. We had presentations, followed by general committee last week, followed by city council this week. There have been more opportunities to speak to this budget than any budget that's ever been passed in the city of Barrie. And I say that with confidence. As my 11th budget I've been part of, it is by far provided more opportunity than ever before. So, number one, thank you for being part of that process and for getting us through it. Number two, folks, please watch what we're saying publicly. Because when we say that things have been stifled or haven't had the opportunity, but there's actually more opportunity than there ever has been before, I take that personally, because when I went to CAA Prowse and I went to our clerk and we started looking at the dates and times and the number of meetings that we were going to be putting into the budget, believe me, it was my pushing for more, do the finance committee before we go to general committee and city council. And that's so that everybody can get on side, get their information in early, get their requests in early, and move forward. If there are things that we haven't done correctly, I think that you've got a couple of months to put it together, because we're going to get into a budget sometime in September. And so come with that feedback, but please come with that feedback, because there has been nothing but open discussion around this table on now 6 occasions to deal with this budget. And when the media asks, well, why, is everything just like moving, the way that it should, it's because there's been so much time and opportunity put into this budget. I believe the first budget conversation with the binders coming around was maybe October 25th or something like that. Maybe it was the first week of November. So this is months, folks. Months we've had this to go through. And you know what the beauty is? It's still not perfect, but it's a really, really good budget. And we have the library who've come on side and they've wanted to work with, and we've had all of our partners who've come on side and they've said, you know what, the first year we felt threatened by what the city was saying in terms of living within means. The second year we're like, uh-oh, we don't know. And the third year it's been bought into. And these are really good things. There's more work to do, there's no question. But these are really good things. So if we have feedback, if we have things that we want to do differently, please bring them. Certainly, doors always open on that front. I'm now going to call the vote. I'll ask for a report of vote on the budget as amended. Excuse me, just 1 second. As amended two times. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Councillor Rietma.
Yes.
Councillor Nixon.
Yes.
Councillor Kungle.
Yes.
Councillor Courser.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Yes, Madam Clerk.
Councillor Negussi.
Yes.
Councillor Harvey.
Yes.
Councillor Harris.
Yes.
Councillor Morales.
Yes.
Councillor Hamilton.
Yes.
And Mayor Nuttall.
Yes. Thank you so much, Madam Clerk.
That was the update about the budget. Thank you for watching.